350 Years of Shadows, the New England Dark Folklore and True Crime Anthology. The following video discusses active, unsolved missing persons investigations, historical cold cases, documented regional anomalies, and centuries-old folklore. The names, dates, and locations mentioned are taken directly from public news reports, archived newspaper files, court transcripts, town histories, and official police records. Any individuals discussed who have not been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent, and the information presented here is for educational, journalistic, and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. New England is a landscape defined by its ancient secrets, weather-beaten stone, and dense, unyielding forests that seem to watch the roads passing through them. To the casual traveler or the summer tourist, it is a region of picturesque coastal villages, historic colonial architecture, and quiet country lanes lined with stone walls. But beneath this charming and curated facade lies a deeply rooted, dark tapestry of human malice, unresolved tragedies, and terrifying anomalies that have baffled investigators, historians, and locals for generations. This is the New England Dark Folklore and True Crime Anthology. Today, we step far beyond the ordinary and embark on a massive, comprehensive deep dive into the absolute darkest corners of this historic region. We have painstakingly organized these accounts chronologically, tracing the darkness of this soil from ancient colonial curses all the way to modern highway horrors. Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself as we venture deep into the shadows of the unknown. Chapter 1: The Blood of the Sachem, 1676. To truly find the roots of the darkness that grips southeastern Massachusetts, we must travel back over 3 centuries, to a time when the soil was first watered with the blood of an empire. Long before modern highways sliced through the trees, the Hockomock Swamp was known to the native Wampanoag people as the place where spirits dwell. But in 1676, it became the final, brutal theater of King Philip's War, a conflict that remains one of the bloodiest and most devastating per capita wars in American history. The war reached its grim conclusion at a massive, sheer stone outcrop known today as Anawan Rock, located on the southwestern edge of the Bridgewater Triangle in Rehoboth. It was here that Chief Anawan, the legendary wartime leader of the Wampanoag, made his final camp, surrounded by the remnants of his warriors. In the dead of night, colonial forces led by Captain Benjamin Church ambushed the camp, forcing Anawan to surrender his sacred wampum belts and weapons. According to regional historical accounts and long-standing local folklore, as Anawan was led away to his eventual execution, a profound and heavy curse was placed upon the land. The native leader declared that the soil, desecrated by betrayal and mass slaughter, would never allow future settlements to know peace. For over 300 years, that curse has apparently manifested with terrifying consistency. Visitors navigating the footpaths around Anawan Rock late at night have routinely reported a sudden, overwhelming smell of burning wood and campfires, despite no fires being lit in the area. More chillingly, hikers and investigators have documented the distinct, disembodied sounds of war cries, screaming, and the rhythmic thumping of phantom drums echoing from the dense, swampy thickets. The energy of the slaughter remains trapped in the stone, making Anawan Rock a focal point for high strangeness within the triangle. Chapter 2: The Cursed Settlement, mid-1700s to early 1900s. Leaving the blood-stained swamps of Massachusetts behind, our anthology expands westward into the state of Connecticut, entering a place buried deep within the dark woods of Cornwall. This is the completely abandoned, notoriously cursed settlement known as Dudleytown. Founded in the mid-17th century by English settlers, including members of the Dudley family, this remote valley was intended to be a thriving agricultural and logging hub. Instead, it became a living monument to human ruin and madness. According to historical archives, local land deeds, and town records from the 1700s and 1800s, an astonishingly high rate of sudden tragedy, inexplicable insanity, and violent demises plagued the residents of Dudleytown. The curse supposedly traced back to an ancestral English heritage involving a curse placed on the Dudley lineage by the English crown, but the horrors that unfolded on the land were devastatingly tangible. Settlers went suddenly insane, reporting terrifying visions of phantoms moving through the trees and whispers echoing from the shadows of the mountains. Mysterious lightning strikes repeatedly targeted and incinerated homes, crops withered without biological explanation, and an unusual number of residents chose to end their own lives within the settlement's borders, unable to handle the oppressive atmosphere. By the early 20th century, the relentless wave of misfortune forced the surviving population to completely abandon the area. Nature quickly reclaimed the land, swallowing the roads and leaving behind only the crumbling, moss-covered stone foundations of the homes. Today, the site is strictly closed to the public, guarded heavily against trespassers by local land trusts and law enforcement. Those who have ventured near the perimeter report an unnatural, heavy silence that blankets the forest. Birds do not sing within the boundaries of the old settlement, and electronic equipment systematically malfunctions, as if the very air of Dudleytown is rejecting the intrusion of the modern world. Chapter 3: The Mercy of the Grave, 1892. Our next chapter takes us to the historic, rocky soil of Rhode Island, pulling back the veil on a time when folklore, superstition, and medical panic collided in the darkest way possible. The year was 1892, in the quiet, rural town of Exeter. A devastating outbreak of tuberculosis, then known as consumption, was ravaging the community, wiping out entire generations of families. Because the disease caused victims to waste away slowly, growing pale and weak, the uneducated public viewed it not as a bacterial infection, but as a supernatural draining of life. Among the afflicted was the Brown family. After losing his wife and eldest daughter, George Brown watched in horror as his 19-year-old daughter, Mercy Brown, succumbed to the wasting disease in January of 1892. Shortly after Mercy was buried in the frozen ground of the local cemetery, her brother Edwin fell gravely ill with the exact same symptoms. Desperate and consumed by fear, the townspeople turned to an ancient, dark folklore superstition. They became convinced that a vampire was actively draining the life force of the living from beyond the grave, and they believed the culprit was one of the recently deceased family members who was refusing to rest. In March of 1892, a group of town officials and frantic citizens legally exhumed the bodies of the Brown family from their resting places. While the mother and eldest sister showed normal signs of decomposition, the exhumation of Mercy Brown shocked the onlookers to their absolute core. Despite being buried for months in the cold ground, Mercy's body was completely pristine. Her skin was lifelike, her facial features had not decayed, and most terrifyingly, fresh, liquid blood was found within her heart and liver when doctors cut into her chest. Driven by absolute panic and a desire to save young Edwin, the townspeople performed a grim public ritual. They carved the heart out of Mercy's chest, burned it to ashes on a nearby flat rock, and mixed the charred remains into a medicinal potion for her dying brother Edwin to drink. The ritual failed to save his life, and he passed away months later, but the legal, medical, and journalistic documentation of the Exeter vampire panic remains one of the most thoroughly recorded instances of dark folklore in American history. It proves that in New England, the line between historical fact, medical tragedy, and chilling nightmare is often completely erased. Chapter 4: The Halloween Patrol, 1970. While skeptics often dismiss regional folklore as campfire stories, the official logs of local law enforcement tell a completely different story. The Triangle is an area where rational, trained first responders have repeatedly come face to face with things that defy modern science. One of the most famous and thoroughly documented encounters occurred on Halloween night in 1970. Two on-duty police officers were conducting a routine patrol along the isolated, tree-lined borders of the Hockomock Swamp. The night was clear, the roads were quiet, and the officers expected a standard shift. That baseline reality dissolved completely as they navigated a desolate stretch of the marsh road. Suddenly, the interior of their police cruiser was flooded with a blinding, intense orange light that seemed to emanate from directly above the vehicle. The officers stepped out of the car, expecting to see a low-flying aircraft. Instead, They looked up to see a massive, metallic, disc-shaped object hovering completely silently just a few dozen feet above the tree line. The sheer size of the craft blocked out the stars. As they watched in absolute shock, the vehicle's police radio dissolved into heavy static, and the car's engine and headlights completely died, shorted out by an unseen atmospheric pull. The silent object remained suspended over the marsh for several agonizing minutes before suddenly tilting on its axis and accelerating into the night sky with an impossible speed that left no sonic boom. The officers filed a detailed, official report with their department the next morning. It remains one of many verified instances where local authorities have put their careers and reputations on the line to document the bizarre anomalies that treat the airspace above Taunton and the swamp as an open corridor. Chapter 5: The Altar of Shadows, 1979–1980. To find the dark, unseen force that connects these modern tragedies, we must enter the dense, choking canopy of the Freton Fall River State Forest. This sprawling woodland is the absolute epicenter of the Bridgewater Triangle, a region globally infamous for paranormal disturbances, magnetic anomalies, and a history of human malice that defies explanation. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the horror in these woods became terrifyingly real, morphing from spooky local lore into a blood-soaked reality. Between October of 1979 and February of 1980, the region was paralyzed by what came to be known as the Fall River Cult Murders. A real-life satanic cult, helmed by a local pimp named Carl Drew, had established a terrifying stronghold deep within the dense forest brush. They did not just gather in secret, they brought a wave of ritualistic violence that left the community shattered. 3 young women, Doreen Levesque, Barbara Raposa, and Karen Marston, fell victim to this group. They were lured into the woods under the cover of darkness, subjected to horrific physical torment, and sacrificed in the name of a dark entity. When police finally raided the cult's locations, veteran officers were chilled to their core. Deep within the Freton woods, investigators located a makeshift cultist hut and an underground bunker filled with unsettling items, upside-down crosses, and pentagrams spray-painted onto the trees. Carl Drew was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but the stain of what occurred beneath those trees remains permanently etched into the forest's legacy. For decades after the cult was disbanded, police officers patrolling the Freton State Forest reported finding evidence of ongoing, clandestine rituals. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, rangers routinely stumbled upon man-made clearings hidden far past the main trails. In these clearings lay the carcasses of cows and calves, meticulously arranged in geometric, ritualistic patterns. What baffled veterinarians and forensic experts was the state of the remains. The animals had been entirely drained of blood, yet when police processed the scenes, there was not a single drop of blood on the forest floor, on the surrounding leaves, or on the grass. The sacrifices had been performed elsewhere with surgical precision, and the remains were carried deep into the woods to serve as a grim warning to anyone who dared wander off the marked paths. Chapter 6: The Terror in the Orchard, 1986. To understand how deeply embedded this darkness is within the regional soil, we move inland to the industrial city of Taunton, Massachusetts, and the freezing winter of 1986. This is the tragic, completely unsolved story of 24-year-old Charlene Garza, a vibrant young woman who stepped into the cold New England air and walked straight into a fatal, calculated trap. It was Super Bowl Sunday, January 26, 1986. The local bars across the city were packed to maximum capacity, with celebratory crowds watching the New England Patriots play in the biggest game of the year. Charlene decided to head out to watch the game and socialize at Artie's Pub, a popular and bustling local establishment located on Weir Street in the heart of Taunton. Witnesses inside the pub reported seeing Charlene enjoying the night, laughing with friends, and taking in the high-energy atmosphere. But as the night wound down, the celebration ended, and the crowds began to thin out. Charlene prepared to make her way home. She left the warmth and safety of the pub, stepping out onto Weir Street into the bitter, freezing night air. She was never seen alive again. When Charlene failed to return home that night or the following morning, her loved ones immediately knew that something was terribly wrong. She was a highly dependable person, stayed in constant contact with her family, and had absolutely no financial or personal reason to run away. A missing persons report was filed with the Taunton Police Department, and a frantic search began. Friends and family retraced her steps, posters were plastered on telephone poles across the city, and investigators questioned patrons who had been at the pub that night. But days turned into weeks, and heavy winter snow began to cover the city, burying any potential tracks or clues. The horrific truth was finally revealed on February 17, 1986, nearly a month after she vanished. A local resident was walking through a secluded, snow-covered apple orchard located just off Route 140, right near the Taunton and Norton town line. Hidden among the bare, frozen trees lay the stiff body of Charlene Garza. The autopsy revealed a level of personal violence that stunned even veteran detectives. Charlene had been subjected to a brutal, vicious physical assault, having been severely beaten and stabbed multiple times. Investigators worked tirelessly, interviewing dozens of people who had been at Artie's pub that night, checking local predators, and searching for a weapon. Yet, the investigation hit a brick wall. No weapon was ever found in the orchard, and in 1986, forensic science was limited. The leads completely dried up, and the case file was placed into the cold case cabinet, where it sits to this day, a monument to a stolen life and a killer who has spent 40 years walking the streets of Massachusetts as a free individual. Chapter 7. The Blood on the Asphalt, 1988–1989. Our next chapter tracks a phantom predator whose identity remains one of the most haunting and frustrating enigmas in modern American true crime history. The year was 1988. The setting was the historic coastal city of New Bedford, a place known globally for its rugged commercial fishing docks. But beneath the salty sea air, the city was about to become the epicenter of an unprecedented nightmare. Over the span of a single year, an invisible terror gripped the region as young women began vanishing off the city streets without leaving behind a single trace, a clue, or a witness. Between March of 1988 and April of 1989, 11 women disappeared from the New Bedford area. They were mothers, daughters, and sisters, many of whom were struggling with substance abuse and the harsh, unforgiving realities of life on the social margins of society. Because of their vulnerable lifestyles, their disappearances were initially treated as isolated incidents by a fractured law enforcement system. But the panic in the community reached an absolute boiling point when the earth began giving up its dead, revealing a grim pattern that could no longer be ignored. 9 bodies were eventually discovered, meticulously hidden along the wooded margins of Interstate 195 and Route 140, the exact highway corridors that sliced directly through the infamous Bridgewater Triangle. 2 of the missing women, Christine Monteiro and Marilyn Roberts, were never found, their fates left suspended in an agonizing, permanent silence. The discovery of the remains launched one of the largest, most expensive, and most frustrating multi-jurisdictional investigations in Massachusetts history. The state police, local departments, and specialized federal task forces combed through the dense brush, briars, and swampy areas bordering the highways. The autopsy reports revealed a terrifying consistency. The victims had been strangled to death, their bodies dumped in a highly calculated manner that suggested a disciplined, organized serial killer. This was someone who knew the local New England geography perfectly, utilizing the desolate stretches of the highway system and the cover of midnight traffic to hide his horrific deeds. Investigators interviewed thousands of people, checked hundreds of leads, and zeroed in on several high-profile suspects within the Bristol County legal community. Among them was a prominent local defense attorney who faced intense scrutiny due to his close connections to the victims' social circles and his frequent presence in the areas where the women socialized. Despite years of intense grand jury testimony, an extensive paper trail, and the eventual advent of modern forensic DNA testing, the New Bedford highway killer was never captured, never charged, and never officially identified. He evaporated completely into the New England fog, leaving behind a massive, freezing cold case file that serves as a grim reminder of the monsters that walk among us unnoticed, carrying their secrets to the grave. Chapter 8: The Hounds of the Triangle, late 1990s. Our next journey into the darkness of the Anthology tracks a phenomenon that bridges the gap between physical predators and spectral horrors. Throughout the late 1990s, police departments in Taunton, Freetown, and Rehoboth began receiving a surge of highly specific, terrified calls from rural homeowners living along the woodlines. The reports were always identical. Residents claimed that a massive, highly coordinated pack of feral dogs was roaming the edges of their properties. These were not standard stray animals or escaped pets. Witnesses consistently described the creatures as massive, jet-black hounds with abnormally large frames and eyes that seemed to catch the moonlight with an unnatural, internal glow. What made these accounts truly disturbing was their behavior. The hounds moved with an eerie, total silence. They did not bark, howl, or growl, even when stalking livestock. Local farmers began finding their cattle mutilated, yet no blood or tracks could be found near the carcasses. On multiple occasions, armed police officers and state rangers were dispatched into the thickets of the Freetown forest to track and eliminate the rogue pack. The trackers easily located the heavy paw prints in the soft mud of the swamp, but as they followed the trail, veteran woodsmen were horrified to find that the massive paw prints would abruptly stop in the middle of clearings. The tracks did not scatter, they did not lead into the water, and they did not turn back. The prints simply ceased to exist, as if the entire pack had simultaneously lifted off the ground or dissolved into the humid air. To this day, the phantom hounds remain a staple of local caution, warning night travelers that some predators in these woods do not belong to our world. Chapter 9: The Vanishing on Route Everettine, 2000. 14 years after the tragedy in the orchard, the soil of Taunton was marked by yet another baffling mystery that challenges the laws of probability. On June 20th, 2000, a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, a 30-year-old mother named Debra Marie Melo vanished into thin air on a busy state highway in broad daylight, leaving behind a timeline that makes no logical sense. Debra, a devoted mother of 2 children, sat in the passenger seat of a car driven by her husband, Louis Melo, navigating Massachusetts Route 18. According to public statements from family members and investigators, the couple's relationship had been highly volatile for years, and Debra was actively looking for a way out of the marriage, planning a new future for herself and her kids. As the car traveled down the highway, a fierce argument erupted inside the vehicle, reportedly centered around financial strain and the impending collapse of their household. The shouting escalated until, according to accounts later given to police by Louis, Debra demanded he pull the car over immediately so she could get out. He pulled onto the shoulder of the busy state route in South Weymouth. She opened the door, stepped out onto the hot pavement, and walked into the humid summer air. Strangely, she left behind her purse, her identification, her money, her cell phone, and every single earthly possession she owned. Louis drove away, leaving his wife standing alone on the side of the highway. He later claimed that when he returned to the area a short time later to look for her, the shoulder was entirely empty. Debra Melo had vanished. When Debra did not return home to Taunton that evening, panic spread through her family. They knew instantly that something was terribly wrong, stating repeatedly to local media that Debra would never under any circumstances willingly abandon her kids. But the mystery deepened significantly when investigators looked at the timeline. Reports indicate that Louis Melo did not report his wife missing right away, causing a glaring, agonizing delay of nearly 24 hours before law enforcement was formally notified that a young mother was missing on a major highway. When authorities finally launched a massive search operation, scouring the thick brush, dense woods, and swampy treelines bordering Route 18, they found absolutely nothing. No footprint in the dirt, no torn fabric from her blue floral sundress, and no dropped personal items. Investigators publicly questioned how a woman could step out of a car on a heavily traveled state route in broad daylight and disappear, without a single commuter or passing witness seeing her get into another vehicle or walk away into the brush. Melo was heavily scrutinized by law enforcement, but authorities have never officially charged him in connection to her disappearance, and he has continually maintained his innocence. For over a quarter of a century, Debra Melo remains one of New England's most haunting, unresolved missing persons cases. Conclusion. From the ancient, blood-stained rocks of the 17th century to the silent, modern asphalt of Route 18, the New England dark folklore and true crime anthology reveals a region permanently defined by its shadows. The official police files, court records, and historical archives prove that whether you believe in supernatural anomalies, ancient regional curses, or simply the isolating, dark depths of the human heart, these lands hold secrets that may never fully come to light. When you drive through these historic New England towns or look out into the dense tree line after the sun goes down, remember the stories of those who walked into the darkness and never returned. Stay on the marked paths, pay close attention to the shadows, and never forget that some mysteries are best left undisturbed in the dark. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave your comment down below what you thought. Thanks for watching.